Last week, we started the book of Acts. The disciples received the Holy Spirit and began preaching the gospel to Jerusalem. And Jesus tells them that they will not just stay there, but they'll take the gospel to the whole world. We talked about how the first church was formed and how they existed in Christian community right from the beginning. But as the book of Acts continues, the gospel goes from Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. A few chapters earlier, we're introduced to a character named Saul. Saul was a Pharisee who prided himself in keeping the rules and making sure everyone else did the same. That was until God decided that Saul's life would change drastically and that he would be used to take the gospel to the far reaches of the Roman Empire. So take some time and read Acts 9, 1 through 9. Paul is on his way to the trading center of Damascus. He's actively looking for Christ followers so he can kill them because of their faith. But suddenly, God shows up and Saul's life is changed forever. God asks Saul a question, "Why are you persecuting me?" Now, we know that God already knew why, but he asked the question so that Saul would have to answer it. You see, we often use the word conviction, but in all reality, it's recognized guilt. It's recognizing that you're actively disobeying God or living counter to what He's calling you to do. Think about the first time you recognized that you were living apart from God. What helped you realize your error, and how did you respond? For me, I'd grown up in church, but I didn't really understand what sin was until one year at CIY, God showed me how selfish I had been. It was hard to see because I thought I was living the way God wanted. But for Paul, and for me, and more likely for you, the direction of our lives changed that day. That's because the gospel can change the direction of our lives. It's always beautiful to watch the change in someone's life. To see them give up old sins, to watch them sacrificially serve others, to watch a tough demeanor turn into a tender one, is really only something that the gospel can do. So what's the biggest change you've seen in yours or someone else's life because they came to know Christ? But the gospel doesn't just change us, it actually has an effect on those around us. Saul was feared and despised among the Christians, but let's see what happens when he needs their help. Read Acts 9, 10 through 31 now. God tells a man named Ananias to receive Saul and begin teaching him about Jesus. He would also restore his eyesight. But Ananias was worried that this was just a trap. So he trusted God anyway and restored Saul's eyesight. Now there's something significant here in verse 17 that we would overlook if we didn't pay attention. This is the first time the followers of Christ refer to Saul as a brother. See, the gospel can change our reputation and our relationships. Would others see a true change in us? They begin to treat us as part of God's family, and your reputation begins to change. Eventually, the Jewish leaders plot to kill Saul after his conversion, but the Christians actually protect him and get him to safety. Later on, he's headed for Jerusalem, and there's Christians there that are still concerned that he's like some sort of double agent and trying to kill them, until Barnabas steps in and welcomes him into the community. What's clear is that there is a change in Paul. And if you choose to follow Christ, both Christians and non-Christians will look at you differently. So what are some ways living for Christ might cause people to view you differently? Sometimes that change is in our hearts, and it's not as obvious to others as it is to us. We can see the change, feel transformed, and begin to do what God is calling us to do. But many others still remember our past. But then God pushes you to start participating in his purpose. And in the next section of Acts, we move away from Saul and see how Peter's ministry continues. So take a minute, read Acts 9:32 through 43. Peter was going around preaching and helping the churches when he found a man who was paralyzed. He went to the man and told him, "Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you." And the man was immediately healed. But often we ask the question, who was this healing for? Well, the answer is really for all. First, the healing is for God, that God's power over human sin and its effects. Second, it points people to the message of Jesus through Peter. And lastly, for the man who gets paralyzed, he gets to experience the power of God through Peter. See, faith is the ultimate goal of these healings. And honestly, what good is healing a paralyzed man if he'll die at a future date? You see, God brings healing according to his will. Healing intersects the power of God with our physical and spiritual world. But God's just not content providing healing for physical problems without dealing with the root problem, that sin has warped our hearts. And our world has pain and suffering and brokenness, but it'll one day be removed. God doesn't always heal people. So why do you think God sometimes chooses not to heal in the same way we want him to? There's this old saying called the Westminster Catechism that says the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So when God chooses to heal or not heal, he's not doing it because he just feels like it. He does it so that people's hearts can be turned towards him. And it's the same calling for us, not just to meet the spiritual needs of those around us, but the emotional, physical, social, and relational needs also. But all of those help point us not to a redeemed world, but to a redeeming God. This week, as we dwell on these stories, let's look at areas of our life where we can help provide healing to someone, not just from something that they're going through, but also to point them to a Redeemer God.